All right, guys, so we are moving into Unit 6 as we just wrapped up ecology. Let's go full screen here. And so as I've told you guys before, all my units lead into the following unit. So in Unit 5 in ecology, we talked quite a bit, and you learned a lot about the importance and value of the organisms on Earth, or what we would call the Earth's biodiversity. So we're just going to go into detail on these different kingdoms of life and why they're important and just different details about them. So some scientists break the kingdoms of life into 6. They split bacteria into 2 groups, and as you can see, this artist did not do that, and I tend to lean in this, certainly for the high school level. Don't think we need to do a lot of differentiating. We will talk a little bit about the differences, but I kind of agree with the fact that they just keep the whole bacteria as one, but that's something that people debate. And so we're going to go in the order in which things evolved, and pretty much, at least as best as possible. And so first we're going to do viruses, which are not considered alive, and that's why you don't see viruses up here at all. You don't see the word virus. And then, so we are going to talk about how they're weird, and obviously we're all dealing with the COVID-19 virus right now. So hopefully you'll feel like you learned something about viruses this week, and help you feel more informed. But then bacteria, all the oldest fossils on Earth by far are bacteria. The first fossils of bacteria are 3.5 billion years old. It took 2 billion years, if I'm getting this correct. Haven't looked at the notes for a while, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it took about 2 billion years before we start to see protists show up. So that means for most of the history of life on Earth, the Earth only had bacteria. And we will talk about the evolution of protists. And then protists, as we've learned before, evolved into fungus, plants, and animals, which was illustrated, hopefully if you did it the right way, with the coloring in your cladogram. So yeah, we're going to go over all these 5 kingdoms as well as viruses. So we're going to start with viruses and talk about immunity, which obviously is incredibly relevant right now. So we'll talk about what's going on the outside here, and part of why they use the term corona for coronaviruses. All right, so a virus can be defined as an infectious particle, which is extremely vague. So a particle just means something extremely small. So I think in actually the CP textbook, it literally says like it's an infectious particle. I think that's why I'm quoting it there. So they're still very mysterious and weird, and nobody knows exactly why they exist or evolved. And they're not considered alive, and that's why they're not shown in any kingdom of life. And that's mainly because they don't reproduce. What they do instead is they replicate, which means to copy themselves inside a host cell, which we'll get into. Another thing also is they typically don't have a cell membrane or cell wall, but they have been talking a lot about the fact that the COVID-19 using soap helps break it down because of its lipid bilayer. So I guess they have a lipid bilayer, but it's not really considered like a normal cell membrane or cell wall. And they typically are surrounded in proteins, mostly. So maybe that's also the difference. Maybe most of it's protein as opposed to lipids. So we get to see the body of a virus. Over here we have an example of HIV as a protein coat surrounding either the DNA or the RNA. So in here, here's the RNA, and then around it is this protein coat. We do see a lipid bilayer there, but again, I'm pretty sure most of it is protein. So this is a virus that we talked about early in the year. This is where if we were in class, I might ask like an extra credit question that was based on when we learned about this before, which was the experiment where they prove that genetic codes are found in nucleic acid molecules. And they use these kind of viruses to figure that out. So that would be from the genetics unit. So let's see here. So this is kind of some different models of this particular type of virus. And what we see here is the protein coat, and then again the genetic codes inside. And So here is an actual photo of one, and I'm going to show you one that's even better that I got recently, but just even this one is really incredible that we have this picture. They are super small, much smaller than any of our cells. They're more like the size of something that would be inside our cells. So being able to get photos like this is incredible. And these ones are particularly weird because if you look at it, it almost kind of looks like a little weird robot. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of COVID-19, and I just showed you some. I showed you a picture of HIV a second ago. They do not look like this. So these ones are particularly sort of weird. And they land on bacteria and then inject the genetic codes into the bacteria. And when I first saw this, I didn't think this could possibly be a real image, but I've done some research, and it does say that this is an actual image of one of these viruses, which is kind of mind-blowing to me as a science teacher and person who's known a lot about images like this for a long time. It's pretty amazing that this picture even exists. Okay, so since viruses don't reproduce, they have to replicate. So what they do is they make copies of themselves using a host cell's materials and DNA. And then we're going to go over two different methods of virus replication. So what we see here, this is more what like COVID-19 looks like than the one we were just looking at. And it has these proteins around it. And we learned about this. This might have been another bonus point question, is what do we call those proteins? So now, obviously, as we're learning about COVID-19, the fact that we learned about these proteins earlier in the year is extremely relevant. And what we're seeing here is the proteins on the virus match up with the proteins on cells, like in our body, for instance, and the cell then basically is kind of like confused and gives access to the virus, which then takes over like the ribosomes, which is what we're seeing right here, which if you remember, ribosomes build proteins. So there's one. This actually might be in the nucleus. So this might be like DNA polymerase, which we learned about also. And then this would be the ribosome. And basically the manufacturing that the cell would do normally for itself or for whatever it's in, part of, is now manufacturing viruses instead. And then they get released, which we see over here. So I say they kind of turn them into a into a virus factory because that's pretty accurate actually for what's happening. So we have the quicker of the two cycles is called the lytic cycle, and it's basically the virus immediately forces the host cell to make more viruses. So here we see that weird virus again where it lands, it's injecting its DNA. Now the cell is making viruses instead of what it would normally do, and now they're kind of complete, and then they burst out and they can go and spread. And this is part of why they killed this cell, and now they're going on to go after more cells. The lysogenic cycle is the longer of the two, and it actually, if you look here, it includes the lytic cycle. So this one's a little different. So the virus merges its DNA with the host cells, which is shown here. And the host then divides many times. So now we have more of the host cell. And then the lytic cycle takes over, and many viruses are made from many hosts. So maybe this is something that viruses evolve to do later so that they could get more virus factories from the cells. But this isn't actually, I've never heard that this is why certain viruses are more deadly. Maybe more contagious, but not more deadly, because the viruses that are super deadly like Ebola or Hanta that kill you really fast, it's not because they're mass producing viruses, and we learned about this before. It's because your own immune system overreacts and destroys your own body is why those really, really bad viruses kill people so quickly.